The Darfur genocide is a problem that takes place to this day in Western Sudan. The genocide started up in 2003 with the armed militia group Janjaweed. The Janjaweed is a group of Muslims and blacks that consider themselves as Arab. They are responsible for the murder, rape, and mass destruction in Darfur, Sudan. The Janjaweed was against non-Arab tribes and the rebellion groups, mainly the Sudan Liberation Army, also known as the SLA, and the Justice and Equality Movement, also known as the JEM, which consisted of mainly non-Arab people. Some things that the Janjaweed group did was kill, rape, and injure people, as well as burn homes, livestock, and poison water wells. The Janjaweed's main goal was to get the fish by draining the sea. In other words, they wanted to kill off as many non-Arabs as possible in order to get rid of them. They did this to the people who did not support their leader, Omar al-Bashir. Omar Bashir was the president of Sudan and came into power in a coup in 1989. During his rise to power, Sudan was in the middle of a 21-year-old civil war between the North and the South. In 2005, Omar signed a deal to end the civil war. A referendum on secession for South Sudan was part of the peace deal, and as of January 2011, about 99% of the South Sudanese voters were in favor of separation. The independent state of South Sudan was declared 6 months later. In Darfur, conflict has been raging since 2003. After the civil war, Darfur still remained underdeveloped and lacked infrastructure. Peace talks were also very unsuccessful. Omar denies that he supported the Janjaweed militias, even though it is quite obvious that he is in agreement to what they were fighting for and who they were fighting against. They fought against the JEM and the SLA. The Justice and Equality Movement, also known as the JEM, were an armed opposition group. They did not support Omar and advocated to replace him as they looked at him as a dictator. The Justice and Equality Movement's main goal was to create a more democratic state that supports all ethnicities as well as women and youth. They wanted to get rid of social injustice that they experienced, as well as political tyranny with justice, and supported equality and basic services for every Sudanese. The JEM was founded by Khalil Ibrahim and is now led by Gabriel Ibrahim, his brother, because Khalil was killed in December 2011. One attack that the JEM took part in took place in 2007, and it occurred in opposition to the fake alliance between the Chinese oil resources and the Sudanese government. The JEM claimed that the revenues that the Chinese oil is put toward the Janjaweed militias and the Sudanese government, which is in opposition to the JEM cause. Another attack took place in 2008, which was the most famous operation against the Sudanese government. The JEM attacked the Sudanese capital of Khartoum, which led to the temporary control over the city of Omdurman. This attack concluded with battles in the western part of the capital and the government's use of army helicopters. The JEM also published its manifesto, The Black Book, in May 2000. The book contained critiques of regional imbalance as well as documented post-independence and predominance of elite groups. In other words, it was how the people of Darfur were against the Central Sudanese government. Now we're going to move into the SLA, or the Sudan Liberation Army. They had a similar goal as the JEM, only they were split into two different tribes, in which had different beliefs. These different beliefs stirred up some internal conflicts amongst the organization. The leader of the SLA is Abdel Wahed Mohammed and was founded by the tribes Fur and Zagagwa in 2001. Fur supports a democratic, decentralized New Sudan. The Fur tribe was very anti-government, whereas the Zagawa tribe was against the militias, but they were not anti-government. In 2004, the Zagawa attacked the Fur tribe land. Ever since the signing of the Darfur peace agreement in 2006, the movement split into dozens of fractions. Many other countries have also gotten involved, one of which was the USA. In September 2004, President George Bush and the U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell declared that what was happening in Darfur was a genocide. The U.S. Congress discloses that what happened in Darfur is considered to be a genocide, which led the president to impose travel restrictions against anyone who is suspected to be taking part in the crimes in Darfur. The president also provided a lot of support toward the African Union peacekeeping force. Some other countries involved were Qatar and Egypt, both of which refused to arrest Omar Bashir in their region. Britain was also involved. Prime Minister Tony Blair wrote an open letter to the members of the European Union seeking a unified response. Prime Minister Gordon Brown said in a speech himself that the Darfur crisis was, quote, the greatest humanitarian disaster the world faces today. It is ironic, however, that the British even have this opinion because the Darfur genocide does not have a great deal of international exposure. It is unlikely that a majority of this class would have even known that there was a genocide taking place in Darfur, let alone know that the region Darfur even exists. The ICC, or International Criminal Court, issued arrest warrants for Omar al-Bashir for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. However, the ICC does not have a police force, therefore had to rely on individual states for individual arrests. The role of nationalism was very extreme during the Darfur genocide. As a matter of fact, it is referred to as ultranationalism because the nationalists were so extreme. The nationalist type used most was militant, which is pretty obvious because it was considered to be a genocide. Some examples of why it was militant was because it was a mass slaughter of non-Arab villages. Over 480,000 Darfurians were killed by the Janjaweed and 2.8 million are displaced. On the other side, nationalism was shown by the JEM and the SLA for rising up against the Janjaweed and the Sudanese government. Ultranationalism and militant nationalism are also exemplified because Omar al-Bashir relies on force by supporting the Janjaweed. He seeks national interests even though it opposes international cooperation. Omar genuinely believes that what he is doing is right for the interests of the people, but all in all, it is not in the interest of anyone except ultranationalists like himself, the Janjaweed, or the Sudanese government. The overall causes of the Darfur genocide are that the Darfur were neglected and underdeveloped following the civil war. Also, they claim that the National Islamic Front no longer protected their interests against nomadic tribes, which led the nomads to committing crimes which Bashir ignored. The effects of this still live today, which is the Darfur genocide itself. It has forced more than 2 million Darfurians to flee to refugee camps since 2003, as well as United Nations and African Union continuously bringing peacekeeping forces into the region. On top of all that, it has led to the death of roughly 500,000 Darfurians.
منطقة أبو قمرة يوم العرب جونا بحيل بطيارات في بير أبو قمرة وقتلوا لنا الناس وشالوا بهمنا مرقنا من هناك جينا منطقة كورنوي بعد ما كورنوي كمان طيارات جو قتلوا أخوي وأخوي صغير واحد كمان مسكوه ولا قتلوا دمالي جينا وهرقنا من هناك جينا تينة من تينة شالوا جابونا هنا.
شنو اللي حصل لكم في دارفور؟
ناس قتلانا، ناس كلها قتلانا.
In 3 years since the United Nations representative in Sudan called Darfur the world's greatest humanitarian crisis. Human rights groups believe around 200,000 people have died in Darfur since rebels began to wage war against Khartoum. Well, Al Jazeera has traveled to the peaks of Jebel Mara, a mountain range in the heart of Darfur, where rebels have established what they call liberated areas, places completely free of central government control. And in the first of a series of exclusive reports, Mohammed Val asked the commander of the local Abdul Wahid rebel faction about his continuing fight against the Sudanese government.
First, a chopper flight over rebel hideouts. Then, an armed convoy beyond the line of government control.
This is Abdul Rahim.
A handover to the fighters of Abdul Wahid.
كم كيلومتر؟ قريب.
A 3-hour walk in the rain. 9 kilometers up the slopes of Jebel Mara mountain, we had only begun to reach the rebel heartland. To see the rebel army chief takes a long and painful trek. But the man who's never shown his face to the world is going to give Al Jazeera his first ever media interview. Commander Gaddura, the military chief and co-founder of the largest rebel movement in Darfur, is the powerful ruler of this mountain. His orders are incontestable, and every rock and tree is his temporary headquarters. With grand gestures, he explained why he deserted the Sudanese army to become a rebel.
I
was in the army of Omar al-Bashir. I deserved a military promotion more than once. But it was denied to me and given to other soldiers who had the right tribal connections. One day a commander who trained us told me, no one wins his rights until he fights for them.